Well, thanks for joining us on this Pro-Life Gen Town Hall. I'm Kristen Hawkins, President of Students for Life and Students for Life Action. We're really excited to have Congressman Andy Biggs from Arizona on with us tonight, so that we can talk a little bit about recent pro-life policy victories. Congressman Biggs has been a pro-life champion in the U.S. House. In 2019, he introduced the Abortion is Not Healthcare Act. I love that name. That bill would stop the IRS from allowing the cost of abortions to be written off by U.S. taxpayers. Throughout his time in Washington, he's continued to be a tireless and outspoken advocate for the preborn. So, Congressman, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We're really excited to have you on.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm grateful to be with all of you. Absolutely.
You know, this is something that you're actually doing our first Pro-Life Gen Town Hall. We have a series of Pro-Life Gen Town Halls we're launching this summer to really kind of show pro-life young people and pro-life activists across the country just how important it is that we have warriors like you in Washington, D.C., and how pro-life policies and folks being willing to stand up for the preborn and their moms, how it makes a tremendous difference. So thank you for joining us. I'm so excited and looking forward to having this conversation with you tonight. For those of you who are tuning in, we've got everybody on mute. You can put your questions in the chat on the Zoom, and I can try to incorporate them in the Congress and I's conversation. Just for ease, though, I'll be kind of asking the questions, and that way you don't have to worry about background noise. Hopefully you won't hear my children too much. They're almost in bed, so I see them outside my office getting ready to go upstairs. But so tonight I just wanted to have just a nice an informal conversation with the Congressman about what's going on in Washington. You know, I've been kind of glued to Fox and CNN trying to figure out what's happening, and but there's been a lot going on there, especially in light of COVID and the crisis that we're currently fighting. And there was one of the things I want to talk to you about, Congressman, about some of the victories you've seen in Washington since, you know, this COVID-19 crisis have started. You know, I think we haven't been talking enough about some of these victories that we've been witnessing.
Well, you know, first of all, there's a massive amount of spending going out. So we've about 3.5 trillion. It's embarrassing to say it's somewhere between 3.2 and 3.5 trillion dollars. But one of the great things about it is that the president has joined, you know, the pro-life members of Congress to prevent that money from going to places like Planned Parenthood or to be used for health care, which is ostensibly family planning, which is code for abortion. We still fight that fight, but that's an important thing. I mean, to have a president who really is actually willing to stand up for that has been remarkable. We still need to do more on that because so much money is going out. We need to make sure that there's a true accounting so that the money's not there. So just so you're aware, we are trying to figure out this 2,000-page bill that just was thrown out at us yesterday. We're trying to go through that to make sure that there's no direct or indirect funding that can go for Planned Parenthood or other abortion providers. So that's my staff. I was talking to my staff about that today, and I know other staffs around Congress, around the Hill, are looking at that. So, but the big victory is, since COVID, is to basically to say we're not going to fund these abortions, and that's pretty huge because not every administration would be so dogmatic about that, but President Trump really is. He really, you know, a lot of people said, oh, he's not really pro-life, but he's turned out to be the most pro-life president in my lifetime. That's for sure.
That's absolutely true. I mean, I know during the campaign in 2016, I was even unsure of where the president stood on the issue of, is this just a candidate who's just saying what we want him to say, and then he's going to get in and, you know, put a pro-choice Secretary of Health and Human Services. But this is a president. He has upheld all of his promises to the pro-life movement. And really, we know personnel is policy in Washington. So, and he's definitely, I mean, you go to HHS and, there are pro-life leaders, you know, courageous folks who've been serving in this administration since day one, who, if you ask them their number one issue, the issue they're most passionate about, why they got involved in politics, they'll say, to end abortion, to stop the injustice of abortion. So that means a lot. And I think it shows just how serious he is. What about the WHO funding? I heard that, I saw some headline the other day of the president kind of saying he's going to defund, or stop taxpayer dollars from going to WHO because of its handling of
so
corona.
that's a good point. Yeah. So one of the big things that President Trump did that I think is critical, and those of us who've watched WHO and other multilateral institutions for quite some time, is to basically, we shouldn't be in WHO at all because of what they do. But by defunding them, he basically pulled the plug on an organization that has been advocating for abortion as a family planning practice for as long as I've been aware of WHO, and that is remarkable as well. And he of course was castigated by the left, but the way to understand that is the left was saying they weren't really so upset about his complaints about the WHO and the COVID relationship and what's going on with that. In reality, the left's concern about not participating in WHO is that the $400 to $500 millions of dollars that we give to the WHO was not going to be available for abortion funding throughout the world. And so it's a long past due. And so again, this was another big victory that the president did just recently. I'm looking at just a couple other things. Just there's some advocacy going on in Congress right now as well, which is why it is important to have pro-life members of Congress, both in the Senate side and the House side, is we're advocating to stop chemical abortions, and the FDA is involved in that. And so we advocate through letters. A lot of us have introduced legislation that under the current speakership of Nancy Pelosi, they're not going to go anywhere. So we have to rely on the administration. So when he pulls us out of WHO, or if he makes sure that the funding is not going to go to abortion clinics, that's a huge win for us, which we didn't have in previous administrations.
Yeah, I mean, that's when you talk about the chemical abortions, thank you for bringing that up, because that's something that, we were fighting in California for about 3 years trying to stop what ultimately was signed into law by Governor Newsom this October, SB 24. This is the bill that's now forcing all state universities to dispense RU486 right on campus. I mean, this fundamentally transforms these college campuses. Now their health centers are abortion facilities, and that's state mandated. And so I'm trying to, really what we're trying to focus on is how do we stop this across the country? Because when I was there and I was testifying, they made it very clear that California was like their test case. And so this spring we saw legislation in Massachusetts, we saw legislation in New York and New Mexico get introduced to try to do similar things. And so I think for us, especially within the pro-life generation, 40% of all abortions now are being committed through these chemical abortions. You've got COVID, which the political left, they're trying to do that Rahm Emanuel, never waste a good tragedy. And what they're trying to do is use COVID to push for the FDA to loosen the rems and prescribe these drugs over Zoom, essentially, to women they haven't seen, which it produces a lot of negative consequences. Not only is there always a dead child, but these abortions are actually there's a higher rate of something to go wrong. And, the likelihood that one ends up in an emergency room is she's a higher risk by ingesting some of these chemical abortion drugs.
Yeah, no, that's right. And in my opinion, what needs to happen is Congress, as whether it's in the COVID funding bills, which there's just outrageous monies going, and no one's even adequately tracking it. So much money is being made available, they can't spend it all, to be honest with you. So it's just floating out there, and with that, Congress has got to make sure that within these bills, there's some specific instruction to withhold funding for abortion clinics. And you have to define what an abortion clinic is. If they're performing any abortions, that's an abortion clinic. And so if they're dispensing RU486, they should be withheld. That funding should be withheld. The issue is they make the bills so bad, and then they don't allow us to, as Republicans in the House anyway, we don't get input on the bill. It just pops up and they say, this is what we're going to vote for. And then they won't let us present amendments. And so we then have to rely on the Senate and say, we beg people to introduce things. And there's people that are trying to do that. And then if we can't get that on, then we take it up with the Treasury Secretary, who's seeing literally trillions of dollars go through his hands and dispersed to national agencies. We need to make sure that none of those agencies are providing these fundings to these abortion clinics. That's critical to us. And so that's one of the things that we're trying to do in Congress now.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's so important. I'm so glad you introduced this legislation because, I mean, historically, you know, the Democrat mantra was safe, legal, and rare. And then 2016, the platform changed, the Democratic platform changed to advocate for abortion all 9 months for whatever reason and taxpayer funded. And we saw it in the Democratic primary debate, you know, the debates that happened this fall, where the language was, if you're not for repealing the Hyde Amendment, which that's that federal amendment that, you know, it's that rider that has to be voted on every year that prevents our federal taxpayer dollars from funding abortion and federal Medicaid spending. If you're not for repealing Hyde and having U.S. taxpayers pay for abortion, then you're against poor women. And that's kind of the messaging that we're hearing from the abortion advocates. And I think it's so important that we're going to have to be very vigilant, hyper vigilant in everything that we do. And so, I mean, everything you're saying tells us why this November is going to be super important.
Yeah, I can't emphasize how important it is. And I'm talking everywhere from the president to your U.S. senators, to your House of Representatives, on down to your state officers and state legislators. For instance, in Arizona, it's a very narrow majority, and even some of our Republicans don't really appreciate life in fully, if I can put it that way.
I know, we'll be meeting some of those folks in July, I believe.
Yeah, well, you're going to see them, and so we have got to make sure that we take all of these offices, because we see what's happening now. And I'll just talk about, if I can, for just a minute, something that I think is really important to understand. Even when we controlled the House, the Senate, and we had the White House, we had over 190 co-sponsors of Steve King's Heartbeat Protection Act. That is a fantastic pro-life bill. We had 190 folks on board. And what that means, and we even had a couple of Democrats, and one of those Democrats was primaried in 2018 and lost, Dan Lipinski. Good guy. And the bottom line is, our Republican leadership would not allow us to take that bill to the floor of the House, even though we were just only about 15, 16 votes away from having a majority just from the co-sponsors. They prevented us from bringing that very important bill to the floor. And now all of the bills, my bill, which I think is an important bill, all of these pro-life bills are basically put in a shredder by Nancy Pelosi, because she controls the House. She controls where the bills are assigned. She controls how and when a bill can go to a committee, whether it ever makes it to the floor for a vote. If you love life, if you're a pro-life advocate, I cannot tell you how important this election is. Because abortions continue in this country, and we have a chance to actually cut into that in a way that is remarkable if we can get the House back and keep the Senate, because this President Trump is willing to sign these pro-life bills. He's willing to do it. And our problem is I could not believe that Speaker Ryan would not allow us to take the heartbeat bill to the floor. And that is really something that breaks my heart. But we've got to get this back if we want to continue to advocate life and protect life for the unborn.
Well, I was just going to ask you, what's the impact of having a pro-life member of Congress? But I think you've answered that question of really what we can do and what the impact is and what happens if we don't elect courageous pro-life members of Congress.
Well, here's another way to think of it is you have members of Congress and even the leadership who refuse to bring the heartbeat bill to the floor. They profess to be pro-life, and I think in their hearts they are pro-life, but they, for whatever reason, and it was politics, I can guarantee you, they would not bring that bill to the floor. But when you move to the next phase of this, it is to get the judiciary. And if Hillary Clinton, just think about this, let's do a counterfactual. In 2016, if Hillary Clinton would have been the president instead of Donald J. Trump, and even with the two houses, with those two vacancies, you would not have seen pro-life, pro-liberty loving, pro-constitution loving members of the Supreme Court. And I think the number is like 275 federal judges appointed now. The distinction is Hillary Clinton would have stacked that court and all the federal courts in a way that would have impacted us for a generation. And for Hillary Clinton and for many on the left, the only issue really ever is abortion. They'll talk about other things, but abortion is their issue. That is the litmus test for anybody. So if you get Donald Trump elected and you keep the Senate, guess what happens? If there's another opening on the United States Supreme Court, you change the trajectory of the pro-life issue for a good 30 to 40 years, just like Roe v. Wade changed it for these 50 some odd years. It will be dynamic. And that's how important it is. And President Trump can't get those judges on the federal courts or the U.S. Supreme Court unless he's got a U.S. Senate that will ratify his selection for the judges. It's imperative. It is crucial.
That's exactly right. I mean, we talk a lot about, what will America be like when Roe is reversed? What do we need to prepare for? How do we need to be preparing for us to serve women and in our communities? And we only will have that opportunity if we, have a pro-life victory in November 2020. That will be the only chance, probably within my lifetime, because of how long these judicial appointments tend to be and just how dramatic they will shape, the outcomes and the course of our country. We saw today another Ninth Circuit Court, a good pro-life ruling. And I was like, wait a minute, the Ninth Circuit, really? But that's the difference that one appointment, two appointments can make. And that's why having a pro-life president, a pro-life Senate. And then also when we talk about the House of Representatives, something that is very near and dear to my heart and to many of our pro-life leaders is we need to defund Planned Parenthood. There's no reason the $1 billion abortion Goliath that should be receiving $600 million from us every single year. And we're not going to defund Planned Parenthood without a pro-life House of Representatives, a pro-life Senate, and a pro-life presidency. And when I say pro-life, that's not just code word for Republicans, because as you know, Congressman, we had a Republican-led Senate in 2016, but we didn't have a pro-life led Senate. And we were actually, I think, 48 pro-life 48 members, pro-life members, and 2 of the Republicans weren't pro-life, and that hurt us. That stopped us from doing a lot of things that we could have done. Yeah.
So just 2 quick points on that. When you say we need to prepare for life after Roe, the way I look at it, there's at least 2 things that you have to do to prepare. Number one, you have to make sure that the safety net for women is there. You alluded to that. And the second thing is, and I think this is important, is what Roe v. Wade will do if it's repealed is it will remove the federal government and a national law on abortion, right? What that means then is that the states will be governing and controlling abortion and pro-life issues. And what that tells me is you better be ready on a state-by-state basis to get in and fight that fight. Excuse me, sorry. So that is really what you got to face. Now, going back to the other thing is when you have some of the folks that we had in the Senate, and they're still there actually, that are not pro-life, it's almost impossible to pass pro-life legislation because it takes 60 votes really in the Senate to pass a bill. I think that's unconstitutional, but that's just the way it is right for now under the rules. So we've got to pass our stuff out of the House and park it in the Senate so that advocates like yourselves can get it and then try to be very active, try to leverage the Senate. But if we can't get it out of the House, the Senate doesn't even worry about life issues. And so it's critical, I mean, to resolve this. But I am anxious, and I really believe that maybe in the next, if everything were to go well in this next election, maybe within the next 2 to 4 years, you would see something happen with Roe v. Wade. The court's already sent signals.
That's right.
The majority of the court has already sent signals now, so it's worth keeping your eyes open for.
It's absolutely worth keeping your eyes open for. I definitely think it's something that's possible. I don't know if you saw last week, Congressman, there was a New York Times article. I couldn't have written it better myself. They didn't interview Students for Life. They had our picture it was the top picture was our students in front of the Supreme Court. But the article was about how young Republicans don't agree with the Republican Party on every issue, but the issue of abortion keeps them in line and keeps them coming back and voting for conservative Republican candidates. And I was really excited to see it because this is something we've been talking about a lot in the pro-life generation. I think historically it's been, I think the DC kind of consultant class has always said, oh, stay away from abortion. Abortion's a losing issue. And for what I do and for all the young people we speak to on campuses, I'm like, no. This is a winning issue. This is a way to bring young people and hopefully get young people to, rethink some of the conservative policy positions and the Republican Party positions. It's not just the narrative that they're being fed on campus because they realize that abortion's wrong, that it's violence and it's discrimination against someone younger and weaker than themselves. So I hope you saw that and we're excited by that to know that this generation, it views abortion differently.
Well, I think the science is really caught up with where the morality was. I mean, it's clearly a life. Clearly, we can do some things. We can discern things we couldn't discern before. But I think the science is there. Mm-hmm. So I'm happy with this generation. Now we need my generation to really catch back up and really get this thing done.
That's right. And I would just encourage all of you. I know sometimes I hear folks, who get discouraged with politics and pro-life movement say, oh, I voted for the candidate and then nothing happened. And I hope you kind of heard what the congressman said tonight about how difficult it is just to get a pro-life bill to come up, just to get it to pass the House, then get it to the Senate, and then needing 60 votes. And it is constant uphill process, but we are so blessed to have so many courageous leaders like the Congressman Biggs and all of the pro-life members who are there, even Congressman Lipinski, who we were there. We were in his district during the primary that he lost. He was kicked out of the Democratic Party and kicked out of his seat in Congress because he has been a staunch pro-life advocate. I don't actually agree with the congressman on a lot of other issues he takes stance on the votes on, and I expressed my disappointment of those issues, but he is 100% pro-life and has been so since he was elected. So Congressman, as we wrap up, what do you think are the best ways that you have seen for grassroots pro-lifers, what's the best way for us to reach you, to make sure what we're seeing, our campuses and our communities, to make sure we're able to influence you? Is it phone calling? Is it emailing? Is it finding you at a town hall when we can be together in person again?
Well, it's all of the above. I mean, for me, I think you know where I am. I used to lobby at the United Nations on life issues, so I'm going to always be with you guys. But if you want to find out and let me know something, the very best way is to send an email to my office, and just look it up, biggs.house.gov. Just send it in, and it gets filtered through there. And like, if you see an issue that I'm not aware of, let me know, and my staff they review every email. We try to respond to every piece of mail we get, and so ultimately I see it, because they always put, even if it's only one letter, if we're writing a letter in response, I see the original letter, because I like to know what's the context of how we're responding. So that's the best way. Telephone calls, probably not as much, because you can't get the detailed message that you can get if you write it out in an email. If I'm at we don't do town halls anymore, because we're all doing this type of conference call. But if you do that, if you see me somewhere, then that's a good way too. But I always tell somebody when I see them in person, I say, because I meet so many people, I say, will you please send me an email? Because then I know I'm going to see it. That's the very best way. And for most members of Congress, that is the very best way.
That's great. That's very helpful for all of us. As we wrap up, we have one more minute with you, and thank you for your time tonight. Thank you all for joining us and staying on. But Congressman, tell us, just as we wrap up, why you fight so hard for life.
Sorry. My witness is that each person is made in God's image. It is a gift from Him. Our obligation then is to protect life, particularly those who are coming in who cannot protect themselves. And that's the reason. That's my witness and my testimony.
Thank you for that, sir. Thank you. I think everyone here on this call tonight would absolutely agree. That's why we do what we do. That's why we serve. And, I want to thank you for stepping up. I think you probably have one of the hardest jobs in Washington, being a U.S. Congressman. It's a tough job. And so I want to thank you for what you do. And I truly want to thank you, sir. And thank you all for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right. Thank us all for joining us this Pro-Life Town Hall. We'll make sure to get the clips up online so you can share this conversation we had with the congressman tonight, and hopefully share it with all those you know in the state of Arizona, and spread the word that we do have courageous pro-life leaders in Washington, D.C. who are willing to stand up even when it's unpopular, even when it's difficult. So thank you all for joining us. Make sure you've signed up with voteprolifefirst.com to join our call or door squad. We're actually making phone calls into the state of Arizona already. I think We're almost over 60,000 phone calls so far this year. Our goal is to get to 1 million phone calls. We'll set you up. All you need is internet, laptop, which if you're on Zoom today, you have that, and your phone. We'll train you. We're working with our friends at Susan B. Anthony to even make more phone calls, and we're sharing data to make sure that all of our pro-life efforts are in unison and are in partnership with each other. So make sure you sign up at voteprolifefirst.com. You can also go door knocking once we're allowed to go door knocking. And there's going to be a lot of really fun activities. And I think we're even going to be paying folks to do that. So thank you all. Good night.